and welcome to this special bonus episode of The Dairy Edge. Teagasc are running a weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also being made available as a podcast. On this week's webinar, Stuart Childs speaks to Joe Patton about optimum nutrition to help cows transition from the dry period to lactation.
Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. So a very important topic to be covered by Joe today in relation to milk fever. Obviously there's cows beginning to calve around the country now at this stage, and in some cases quite progressed in some parts of the country, in the earlier parts of the country already. So milk fever is a problem that probably occurs on every farm in the country at some point in time during the course of the calving season. And Joe, the whole, I suppose, a bit of an explanation around why it occurs so that you can understand it from that point of view, and then also maybe the ways around it. So like obviously most people will be using their dry cow minerals in order to try to prevent it, but it doesn't always prevent it. So Joe's going to cover the aspects of what people can do, and especially in situations where cows start to go down, maybe solutions to solve that in a fairly timely fashion to try and resolve it so that it doesn't become a very significant issue for you. So Joe, you have a few slides that you're going to share, and as I said, there will probably be about 40-45 minutes at most. And we'd encourage you, if you put them in straight away, because both Joe and I have other appointments at 11, so we will be finished before 11. Okay, so share away there, Joe, if you're okay to do so.
So yeah, look, as we said, we get straight into it. It's really around transition management, Stuart, and getting over the hump. So really, as we know, look at 60, 70, 80% of your problems probably are going to happen in the next few weeks. A lot of your clinical disorders, you know, everybody can see that it's a busy time for vets, a busy time on farms, and obviously the calving event causes a shock to the system, I suppose, for the cow, and that's what we have to try and get over. So look, it's something that we've been saying for a few years now, and certainly speaking a lot with Finbar's group in UCD as well, and the way they approach it, it's very interesting that they would always say, look at this as look at your issues around milk fever and ketosis and displaced abomasums and retained placentas and all of those things together, almost as a complex of related disorders, really. So really, if we could solve the problem on subclinical milk fever, I suppose it will help for some of the issues, particularly in the first few weeks post calving. So, you know, a lot of hares with retained placentas over the years would have said that if they fixed their milk fever or their subclinical milk fever problem, that the retained placenta problem in a lot of cases will disappear. And similarly with the displacements in the early part of the season. And there is a difference, I suppose. We should just point that out, that you do get displacements in March and time when maybe people are running tight on grass, and that's a slightly different thing, but we probably should come back to that at another time. But look, the main point is, if we take all those issues together, slow calvings maybe thrown in on top of that as well, a lot of it is down to a lot of it might be down to calcium status, right? So just to give an idea of what we're talking about here, and we're looking at blood calcium, and there's loads and loads and loads of stuff published over many years on this, going way back to the war period almost on a lot of this stuff, that people know that if there's a problem with milk fever, it's a calcium issue, that you're getting a drop in blood calcium right on the point of calving. And that's what that chart is showing, Stuart. So you can see there, the one that drops away down, that's clinical milk fever. You're getting a big drop in calcium right on the point of calving. And I suppose the ones that are without clinical milk fever then are sort of staying above that. So yeah, look, the point here, I suppose, sure, we just want to make is, when you look at that, right, that normal cows and cows with clinical problems, you can see there that, you know, for a couple of days pre-calving, there's no difference. And really, after 4 or 5 days post-calving, it's they're back to sort of relatively normal again, right? So it really is that period for that sort of couple of days 2 days pre-calving, I suppose, till 2 or 3 days post-calving is the issue. So I just wanted to make that point, that I suppose that should inform what we think, or how we think about managing cows from that period just before to maybe a couple of days after. If we can get them over that period, I suppose that's what we're sort of trying to achieve. But it is interesting to see that the ones that get it and the ones that get it don't seem that different pre or certainly post calving. They can recover, but obviously a lot of problems can happen in the middle. So it's that period of risk we're trying to look at. So just to make that point again, we said there about the differences, they're all linked to different disorders. I suppose just to make the point, it's muscle function and immune function together that are the problems, right? So with low blood calcium, immune function is dropped, and also muscle function is dropped. And it's obvious that muscle function drops because you see things like obviously cow down essentially is the classic look, but also slow calvings or cows that are just not steady on their feet. So muscle function goes awry with low calcium, but also immune function as well. And that has that can have an effect on mastitis, can have an effect on displaced abscess, and an effect on metritis as well. So look, get your calcium status right, and then we're sort of saying, your immune function and your muscle function can be improved. And just to maybe finally look at the point before we move on to how to prevent this problem, I suppose. This is just looking at this is just a chart basically of rumen wall, or it's basically the contractions of the rumen wall. So you can see here when calcium status is good, you've got plenty of activity, but when calcium status or clinical problems with milk fever, the rumen stops working essentially, and that's what causes your issues, maybe with displacements and things like that. So it just does prove the point that a lot of this stuff is linked together. So what are the things, Stuart, we need to be looking at? And I suppose that's all right looking at the theory behind it, but what do we need to be watching for over the next couple of weeks? So really, to try and break this down into something that people can use, it's really 4 or 5 main points that we want to be looking at. So again, we've been saying this for a while now, and it's nothing new to us or nothing new to any other groups looking at this. It's low dietary magnesium, high dietary K, which is potash essentially, too high in cations, which we'll come to in a second. That's pretty much, you could nearly take that as being driven by too high in potash. Too heavy a condition on cows, and then obviously older cows as well, and maybe a risk with Jersey genetics as well might be an issue too in terms of increasing the risk of milk fever. So magnesium, potassium, body condition, and age. And I suppose we should also throw in there as well that vitamin D certainly as well. Vitamin D would be something that requires a lot of talk about vitamin D on the radio these days for other reasons, but for our cows, it's also required in terms of improving their chances on calcium. So look, just to keep moving, it's too late really in most cases, Stuart, at this stage to do anything about body condition, and I suppose we have to make that point. We're looking at trying to get to 3 1/4, which looks something like that as an ideal for calving down, so you can still see the rib structure, but it's not covered in. But really at this stage, it might be, for a lot of people, it might be too late to do much about that. You're not going to change body condition in the cows that are quite close to calving now. So I suppose for the ones that are coming to the point of calving and beginning to spring down, we would almost be saying that if they're over conditioned, it's probably, you could actually make a problem worse by trying to do too much in terms of holding their intakes down. So we should be focusing on the ones that are over conditioned. It's managing them in terms of maybe calcium on the point of calving, making sure that they've extra mag in their diet, for example, and making sure that their forages are low in potassium as well. Those would be the options around that. But I don't think it's a good idea to be very heavily restricting cows that are in over-conditioned in the week before calving or the few days pre-calving. I think at this stage, intake is going to be down anyway. You need to stop them being too short in energy and protein. The ship has sailed essentially for trying to solve problems with body condition on the cows on the point of calving. However, we probably should say though that if the March calvers and the April calvers are looking like they're starting to gain a bit of weight, it's probably an option to limit their feed on those ones that are not coming into that final period pre-calving. All right. So the essential point is don't try and expect miracles on body condition in the next few days. If the cows are already springing down and over conditioned, I would be focusing more on intake, mag levels, and possibly calcium, intervene with calcium on the point of calving or just after calving would probably be a better option than trying. You're not going to change condition in a few days, obviously. For cows that are under conditioned at the moment, and if silage quality is poor, probably, if they needed ration at this stage, it's getting a bit late for them. They're probably the main thing for them is that they're well fed, well covered for minerals, and possibly, Stuart, post calving is they're looking at candidates for once a day milking for a while after calving, because again, trying to do much in terms of body condition manipulation at this stage is going to be difficult. That cow looks empty as well as thin, so there's probably an issue there other than just the body condition. They're obviously linked together. And there's a cow, obviously, that we've this Pearl cow features in a lot of my presentations, but she's a good example of what you don't want, basically. And effectively, that's actually a recycled cow from a few years ago in Johnstown that we don't recycle them anymore, precisely for that reason. What are you going to do there? Like that's too late to do much about her. You're probably talking about maybe a bolus, maybe like a Kextone bolus or something like that, and definitely calcium on the point of calving for a cow in that case. So there's definitely that's a time bomb. Like that's what that is. Make sure your late ones don't end up in that position by restricting their feed for the next couple of weeks, I suppose, if possible, and certainly, and I suppose, look, I would urge people in this situation is, if they have cows in that situation, Stuart, speak to your vet now, right? And just go through the protocol for dealing with those, because sometimes people overdo the calcium on the point of calving. They could put too much calcium into the vein, for example, which is certainly a problem. It's really calcium under the skin or a calcium bolus. So I think if those issues are arising, and those issues are if you want to look about prevention of milk fever for those risky cows, it is well worth just having a chat with your own vet for 5 minutes before the issue happens, I suppose, to be clear as to what the protocol is. Because I think sometimes, people go with bottles into the vein that they shouldn't do, and people might go with overloading. It's often the case that cow down means a little bit of panic in some cases, and people overdo the calcium, which can cause a problem as well. So just be clear, it's probably calcium under the skin or a calcium bolus, but certainly don't, it's a case really of, just double check speak to your vet in advance to make sure that you're happy that you know exactly what to do in terms of a preventative thing. Because I do think sometimes you can have people going in with 2 bottles into the vein and things like that, which is not a good idea. So I think certainly double check and have a quick chat with your own vet on the best practice around that. But certainly it's pre-calving calcium, or calcium on the point of calving, which is probably a bottle under the skin or a bolus indeed. But don't overdo it, I suppose, is the main message there. All right. We've talked about this before, Stuart, and I'll just put a bit of a thing on it. We'll not spend too long on it. Pre-calving protein. All we're going to say with this is, if the silage is poor, if the silage is particularly poor and particularly low in protein, there may be an advantage to giving maybe something around 0.3 of a kilo. So a kilo for every 3 cows, essentially. 1 kilo of soya for every 3 cows. Soya very expensive at the moment. Even a half a kilo of distillers would do a relatively good job. But soya would be the one, I suppose. But it's a very small amount for maybe a week or so pre-calving if needed. But if your silage is kind of 12% protein, there's really not much advantage to it at all. And really testing colostrum quality will tell you whether you need it or not. So there's not any defined need for feeding meal pre-calving unless silage quality is very, very poor, or there's a lot of straw going into the diet. I think that should save people a bit of hassle doing all that without the necessity for it. And I would make that call based on the protein percent in the silage, and also having a look at your colostrum quality and seeing is it adequate. And if it's adequate, I think we're happy enough that you don't really need much supplement pre-calving. And that's a similar message. No effect to production, no effect to cow performance by feeding more concentrate, pre-calving. So look at simplify that down a little bit. Okay. I might go to the mineral side of things, maybe. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Just a question related to that there, George.
Yeah, sorry, George. Yeah.
Yeah, just is there any, we'll say in terms of subclinical milk fever, is there any possibility that maybe feeding a small bit of dairy nuts in the short period running into calving could be an impact causing milk fever? Like, so maybe people putting heifers through the parlour and things.
I don't think with heifers. I think with heifers, I think we should be okay. I think, look, what are you going to do with heifers? The best thing is to train the heifers in, and if that means trickling a bit of concentrate that's already in the line to do that, that shouldn't be a problem, because the risk with heifers and milk fever is relatively low anyway. I wouldn't be going in feeding a couple of kilos of, look, there'll be calcium in the milking ration, and most likely. You're probably trying to avoid keeping the calcium out. What we would be talking about concentrate pre-calving there, Stuart, would be pretty much, if it's for protein to improve colostrum quality, essentially what you're talking about there is a very small amount of soya going a long way, right? So it's straight soya essentially is what you'd be talking about. But some people would have said over the years that, I'm going to feed 2 kilos of a sort of a pre-calver mix to get the cows up and going and get them ready for the concentrate post-calving. There's really no need to be doing that. I think if we start our cows on sort of 3 kilos after calving and be sensible around what we do in terms of the first few days after calving, there's really no need. There is no benefit to putting in meal pre-calving to cows, unless they're very thin, of course, and if you're trying to build condition in the early part of the dry period. But the idea that you're going to condition the rumen for this heavy level of meal feeding in the post-calving really doesn't. It's not really. It shouldn't really feature in the system. And funny enough, talking to some of the guys in Northern Ireland that would be feeding a lot of concentrate, they've sort of moved away a little bit from the pre-calving ration feeding as well. It does cost, there's a cost in it. You can risk overfeeding them and for not much benefit. So good quality silage, focus on the mineral, and slow and steady after calving is better than messing around with pre-calving feeding, which causes cost and it causes labor as well, which at a busy time it's not really required, All right.
So
maybe
when you say being sensible, post-calving, you're talking about not slug feeding cows straight after they calved, going on to 6 kilos, like.
Yeah, and like people say, well, how do I do that then if I'm sort of how do I do that if I'm setting the rations for 6 kilos? If they're milked once a day for the first couple of days after the calve, like that's 3 kilos. Like let them settle and let them come like that. Do you know what I mean? Depending on your system, if you're going to, I think it's really until they're in the colostrum group should be just managed for space, for comfort, for forage intake, and that kind of an idea, rather than putting them straight into the main group and roughing it in the main group until they're settled into themselves, Stuart. Because as we saw, that's why I showed that chart there on your calcium status. Like the cow gets back to normal after about 3 days or so, 2 to 3 days. Give her those 2 or 3 days with a bit of comfort. And then from there on, then you're expecting her to do her job in terms of grazing, in terms of intake, in terms of milk production. But when she's kind of until she goes into the tank, essentially, you're dealing with a cow that's maybe a little bit delicate in terms of their metabolism. So give her the couple of days to recover. Like you're looking for over 500 kilos of milk solids out of this cow. Give her a couple of days to get right. Like that's what we'd be saying. It's not. There's going to be no production benefit to pushing her hard early on. That's the point.
Yeah, sure. So, like even in terms of milk yield response, like she's going to build up from her maybe 6 or 7 litres of colostrum straight after calving, potentially. She's going to be doing 20 litres by day 4 anyway, so you don't need to shove the daylights out of her to get there. Like.
You don't have to, exactly. I think that's really what we're about, I suppose. Once that animal is recovered and sort of back to normal calcium status, has her intake sort of sorted out, has cleaned and is back to normal, are relatively normal and out of the colostrum group, suddenly then you have an animal that you can work with then, rather than be, they don't get minded when they go into the main bunch, I suppose. That's the essential point. Okay. Look, we'll
a way of looking at it is, if most people will have been in hospital themselves at some point in time, and the day after you come out, you don't eat a steak dinner generally. So yeah, I suppose keep that in mind.
Take it easy for a couple. Yeah, keep it for a couple of days. Take them easy for a couple of days, and they'll pay you back. That's what I.
Give them the old bit of toast and butter and a cup of tea to get them going.
You're a fan of the Boyle 7-Up by the sounds of it, Stuart.
Yeah, or the Lucozade without the bubbles,
which is a good energy source. Yeah, that's propylene glycol or sugar to get them going. It might be the worst thing. So don't anyone go home now giving 7-Up to fresh cows. But look at all I want to just make the point there. Look at, in terms of our intakes, most of our intakes are going to be in this range, Stuart, 12 and a half kilos as a dry cow, right? 12 kilos roughly, right? So when you think about it, they're going to be 12 kilos before the week of calving. Then they'll drop down to 8 or 9 kilos maybe on the days of calving, and then once the calve and come in, that's where their intake's going to be for the first couple of days. Like, it's that 12, 13 kilo range. Like, they're not going to be at your 18 kilos straight away. It'll take them about 10 weeks to get to the high intake over that period of time. So when you think about they're not suddenly going to calve and then eat 18 kilos. It's going to be a relatively slow and steady build up, but a steady build up nonetheless. So you're starting to build the intake from sort of that 11 to 12 kilo mark by about a kilo a week after that. So, don't go slugging in straight away expecting cows to eat it, because generally what will happen is it'll cause issues with the digestive upsets. So just slow it down and make sure they're comfortable and plenty of space and plenty of good quality forage, and then start your build up after that. But for most people, they're probably not going much more than 6 kilos anyway. You can get to that relatively quickly in terms of once you get out past those few days. We're not talking 10 kilos or 12 kilos of ration here. It's not huge levels of feeding for most people. Look, we'll move it on quickly to keep moving on the minerals, and just a few things we want to make points on here, Stuart. We've looked at this before, but it is important to come back on it again. The potassium, the K levels, our silages tend to be low in potassium. Well, used to be low in potassium, but I think they're starting to rise because people are doing a good job now in terms of soil fertility. Magnesium is where it is down at about 16 grams per kilo. We really need 40 grams per kilo for the dry cow, so 0.4%. So really, for all we want to say from that slide is there's enough. You shouldn't have any additional calcium really. The phosphorus, probably you need a bit of phosphorus in your mineral to balance that up, because this is what the cow needs versus what's in general sense what's in the silage. We need no added calcium, a bit of phosphorus, we need plenty of magnesium, and we need to watch the potassium in the silage. If there are problems, it might be the cause of the issue, right? That's the point. Okay, so that's the variation in K content. We've seen this before, but it's just to bear the point. That's our average value there, that middle bit. But as you can see, there's a big range. There's plenty of silages above it and a good few silages below it. So if you're up at this level and you're starting to push on to sort of 2.3, 2.5, maybe 2.5% K, you then start to say, right, I need to be watching that. I need to make sure I have plenty of mag in the diet. I need the right source of magnesium as well. And I want my cows in good, I want to manage it a little bit. When you push up to sort of 2.7, 2.8% K, you definitely are in risk territory for milk fever. We would be suggesting either dilute it out with a different silage, or there are other options as well. But I think diluting it out, if it's at very high levels, is needed. If it's more kind of 2.3 to 2.5, maybe the extra mag will get you over the hump. And really at 2% and below in your K, it's really not probably contributing hugely to the risk of milk fever. Now, that's not to say that you won't get milk fever, but it's probably more to say that it's not the potassium that's the problem. Like, you could have low K, but very poor magnesium and over-conditioned cows, you will have a problem. But it's to find the issue, I suppose, we're talking about. Just think about that sort of, certainly 2.5 and over. I would be saying ring your advisor and see what the options are. It's a thing that can go missed on farms at times, right? So look at
just to cut in there on you then. Is hay high in K?
It can be. It can be. We were surprised actually. We would have been making haylage and that in Aidan would have been doing it in Johnstown, making haylage, and from certain sources, the haylage was 2.3, 2.5% K. Stuart, it was keeping the condition off the cows, but it was actually high enough in potassium. I don't think we could. I suppose generally speaking, straw will be lower. Barley straw would be lower in K for most of the time. Oaten straw can be high enough in K, funny enough. Hay depends, but it really depends on the source of the hay. Basically, I would say that probably straw would be a safer bet, to be honest. I think straw is probably a safer bet, but there's plenty of generally look at what's going to cause the high K. A lot of slurry application, leafy grass, and first cut, essentially. Like most hay, to be fair, like a lot of the hay made won't be in that category. But that's not to say that it mightn't be, if you know what I'm trying to say. So just don't assume that it's low in K. I would say you could probably be a safer bet with a bit of straw, and probably with straw, there's probably a bit more control in terms of knowing exactly what you're getting as well. You know what I mean? Hay can be variable, but straw is more consistent. So if you're in trouble, you're probably talking about 2 or 3 kilos of straw to make the difference, plus restricting the silage back. But then also, if you're going to do that, you would probably need to put in your lick of soya then to bring your protein back up, Stuart. You know what I'm saying? So if you have very high K silage, and you're diluting it down, you basically what you're talking about for your close-up cow is it's sort of 3 kilos of straw plus a bit of soya, rather than just 3 kilos of straw alone, because you would be a bit raw for protein if you have to go with a lot of straw to dilute the K, if you get what I'm saying. So don't forget that one. But look at, there's other options there around binders and things like that maybe probably for another day really to go into those. But I would say dilution of the K would be certainly an option. And we'll come back in a second to the source of mag can have an effect as well. Okay, so that's our kind of thing. No added calcium, sort of phosphorus 0.3%, but don't overdo it because it can cause problems. So if your phosphorus is kind of around 0.3, or if there's kind of about 3% to 3 or 4% phosphorus in your dry cow mineral, you should be fine. So just check that there's a bit of phosphorus in it. I think that should be enough. Did come across a herd this week actually, very, very low phosphorus in the silage, which I was surprised that I hadn't seen that in a long time. I would be sort of suggesting to up the phosphorus levels for them, for their dry cows, because they were getting a few issues. But so just double check that. And don't overdo the P. Is the point. So don't overfeed your compound mineral. It'd be a message. If the bags is 120 grams, I would say feed 120 grams. Don't go charging in with a huge amount extra, because you could undo good work, right? As we said, the mag, I think if we can take one thing away, the magnesium, make sure you're getting enough magnesium in, particularly for the last couple of weeks pre-calving. And most minerals now have improved the levels of magnesium in them, which is a good thing. Some people might want to go with a bit of extra mag on top of that for the last couple of weeks, which is probably helpful enough. I might just skip to that actually for a second. So the options around that would be, you can have, if you wanted to go to extra magnesium, you're probably talking about, really it's mag oxide, which is your CalMag, or mag chloride, I suppose. That's the two that would generally be people would be using most of. Now, just to make the point, Stuart, that mag oxide is your sort of CalMag, and it's probably the easiest one to get your hands on, and it's the cheapest one, I suppose. And it does top up the mag if it's necessary, but it's 55% magnesium. But sometimes if the quality of the CalMag is very coarse, if it's kind of rough enough grade stuff, that even though you feed more of it, they mightn't absorb that much of it. So particle size is important. So for people that are in trouble and are having issues, I would say, and if the K is a bit high in the silage, maybe mag chloride might be a better option altogether. So kind of 20 to 30 grams of mag chloride in the water, or maybe on the silage, might be useful. But look, I think the point with mag chloride is it can cause palatability issues. But I think if you have a good quality dry cow mineral and you think you need a little bit of extra mag in the right form just before calving, a bit of extra mag chloride in the water or on the silage would be something to consider. Again, very hard to give recommendations to everybody on that in a call like this. So I think if you think there's an issue, you think that there's a bit of too much problems, and you have maybe your silage is a bit rich in K, you might want to consider extra mag for the cows that are springing, essentially, for that couple of weeks. The chloride might be as good an option as anything there, but CalMag will work quite well in most situations. But where there's a niggly problem, I would say maybe chloride is a better option overall. So that's just and there are plenty of people doing that to good effect. Okay, so look at when we've gone through this before, sure, but it's just to sort of, again, it's coming back. Most people have this in the bag and in the yard at the moment, and they're feeding away at it, and they're hoping that it's working well. It's just to double check the mag levels, as I said, top them up with mag oxide or CalMag or mag chloride if needed, kind of 20 grams maybe of mag, 20 grams of CalMag, maybe 30 grams or a bit more of the mag chloride if necessary. But that's, again, you need to just check what's already going in. And one as well, I suppose, is the vitamin D that I mentioned a while ago. Make sure there's a good level of vitamin D in your mineral, which can help for milk fever for sure. So those are the big ones. If we're going to focus on milk fever this morning, rather getting into all these other things, I think those would be the main main issues, I suppose, to consider. All right. And just maybe, just one final thing is that's a kind of a checklist, as we say now. That's from Finbar stuff from a few years ago, which is, I think, is a nice summary of what we're talking about. So look at, rather than getting into too much detail, it's the body condition, it's keep the calcium levels low in the supplement, make sure your dietary phosphorus is okay, the mag, again, that I keep saying, your dietary potassium is important to keep that lowish. And then if you have problems, you want to be sort of looking at your blood calcium and blood magnesiums. Interesting to see how they change post-calving. But as we said, the changes are very quick, so there's no point in doing blood calciums 3 or 4 or 5 days after, trying to define a problem. It's really calcium on the point of calving in the blood that's the problem. So our target, I suppose, and this is one that came up actually with an advisor, there relatively recently, where she was talking about a herd that said that it hadn't much problem with milk fever, and there was a few issues but not big issues. But turned out your man had sort of 9 or 10 cases every year in a herd of 80 cows, which is a lot of milk fever as far as I'm concerned. So look at 5% or less in 100 cows. You want like two cows, any more than 2 cows with milk fever, and you're saying here, we need to be looking at this. Do you know what I mean? That's what we would be talking about. So for the year, 100 cows, maybe we tolerate 2 with milk fever, 2 or 3, maybe that's about it. We want to be keeping it under that. In terms of displacements, you'd rather see none every year. You tolerate 1 in the year, I suppose. And another one as well is kind of assisted calvings, and assisted calvings are difficult calvings. Less than 10%, you would certainly want it to be less than 10%, I would say. So just to give people their own idea, if you're on the line thinking about your own herd, sort of take those figures, less, sort of 3% or less for milk fever, I would say, 3% or less for displacements, certainly less than 10%, probably less than 8% for your calving, for assisted calvings. If you have any more than that, you're probably saying, okay, I need to probably just take a look at this with my vet or with my advisor and say, can I tidy up? Is there an issue in the background that I'm not getting not getting on top of, And just one final thing, Stuart, just to finish it out. This is something that we talked about a bit with some groups over the last couple of weeks, and it's interesting that every yard seems to be a bit different for this, right? And you can tell me this is what you see out there, but I think it's very useful just for people to think about the flow of cows through the system. How does a cow go from being a dry cow to being a milking cow, essentially? And in many steps, or how is that managed? Now, this is down to facilities, it's down to space, and it's down to sort of management, and really down to having good scanning data as well. Actually, having good data on your breeding to know when cows are due, essentially. But some yards that are doing a good job on this, and I'm sure there's plenty of them on the line, they're looking at it in sort of a logical sequence, that you've got your far off cows, which is your cows that are fully dried and no sign of, that are at least sort of a month, from 3 weeks to a month at least from calving. They're in the far off shed, which is really a case of making sure they're in the right body condition, making sure they're healthy in terms of parasites and lameness, and making sure, and lice and all those things, and making sure they're getting their minerals right. Then you move to your close-up ones, which is when you start to see them springing. There's a separate area kind of where you keep the ones that are starting to spring down. You keep those kind of separate, that you can watch them a bit closer. Then you're thinking about space, extra space, maybe at least a cubicle, if not more than a cubicle per cow. You're giving them, probably closer to, giving them 30 inches of feed space, really getting plenty of feed space, no limit there. They're getting their minerals, and if you have to top them up with mag chloride, that happens in that group of cows. So that essentially you're looking at a group of springers there, basically, beside the calving area, which then is, on your straw bedding and all the rest of it. Again, that's comfort, space, your water supply, and mag important there. From there, it's into the colostrum group once they're calved, which is kind of until the 7th milking. They're separate to the main group, which is all about recovery, simple management of intake, keeping an eye for milk fever, and probably in a lot of cases milked once a day for comfort for the animal and convenience for the staff or the farmer to not have to milk 2 groups twice a day. And then once they're through that system, then you're onto the milking herd, where its body condition, intake, and cell count become the issues for the spring. So rather than going from, rather than when a cow is thinking of calving, fishing her out of the big shed and firing her into somewhere and then putting her to the main herd, there's a logical sequence, and the controls for health and comfort are thought about for each of those steps. Sounds like a lot of work. It probably reduces work in real terms, because it keeps all the similar types of cows together, and then they're very easily managed after that. Okay.
Yeah, very good. I suppose, and the other thing that I suppose, if people don't have that set up for this year, there's still time to do it. And the other thing is to, I suppose, at the end of the calving season, think back about it and see what could be done maybe to improve it for 2022 then.
And look at it. Might sound, it's maybe you were making a big thing out of nothing here, but like really, when you think about this, right, you've got your far off and your basically all that is being able to divide your dry cow shed in two, that you can give your close-up cows a bit more space and keep them together, and keep those in one part of the shed that are easily observed. Everyone should or will have a calving area. And then the only other adjustment then is to keep your colostrum cows in a small group together for a few days after calving. So really the only adjustments that are needed there for most people, Stuart, is being able to split your dry cow shed and keeping a colostrum mob together. That makes it work. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, very good. So I suppose to sum it up, Joe, like ultimately you're saying that the calcium metabolism of a cow is critically important to how they function for their upcoming lactation. Everything is basically tied to muscle function. So the metritis is as a result of lack of uterine contraction post-calving if their calcium status is undermined. The going down is obviously as a result of the lack of calcium as well. The teat sphincters, then you pointed out as well, like that if muscle function is compromised, they don't close up properly post-milking, and they're more inclined to contract or get cases of mastitis and so forth. And I suppose you were talking about the dystocia or the harder calvings, and people might be thinking, what's that got to do with calcium? But ultimately you're saying that if you're assisting more than 10% of the herd, there's obviously a reason that they're not calving naturally themselves, as opposed to it being an issue with bull selection, which could be a factor in it, but in most cases shouldn't be like.
Yeah, that's the thing. You look at we all know the situation when you get a monster of a calf, like a big calf. You can understand why. You can understand why there was a difficulty calving, sure. But then you get some other times you're probably thinking to yourself, geez, she should have been able to calve that calf. Like, that kind of way, you're sort of saying there shouldn't have been a problem there, because the calf's, moderate enough in weight, like they're not a big calf. So you're probably saying, keep an eye on your milk fever, and maybe iodine as well might be, just to mention, iodine might be an issue for some herds, but milk fever would generally be the one. It'll help tidy those issues up, I would say. And look at the other thing is that, like we said, we said now, look at the body condition, the magnesium, the potassium, and the vitamin D are the control measures. If you're struggling with some of them, or if there's an issue that maybe the body condition has gone a wee bit out of kilter, you have cows that are going to be risky, and there's some issues already arising on the farm. The main thing is to sort of have a chat with your own vet and say, look, I need to do something. I need to prop them up for calcium for the ones I know are going to have problems, even though I try to control it. And just have a chat with your advisor as well in terms of, how much mag am I feeding? Am I feeding enough? Do I need to add a bit more? And what are my options around that? And, our advisors will give you a quick steer on how much chloride or CalMag you need to add in to solve your magnesium problem. That's as simple as that, really.
Okay, and I suppose another thing that's important to point out is, and it comes down to good records, but if cows got milk fever last year, there's a very, very high likelihood that they're going to get milk fever this year if you don't do something about it.
That's it. That is a thing. If they're a year older too, and parity, obviously, or lactation number is a fair risk factor. Is a fair risk factor for it. Yeah.
Okay. So just one or two final questions then, Joe. I suppose just you mentioned about the crossbreds having that higher propensity. So the parity makes sense because obviously they're producing a lot more colostrum when they're milked. So that surge of a draw on calcium kicks in rather than the first or second calver. What's the scenario in the crossbred that's just causing that higher level of milk fever potentially?
Why? I suppose you will definitely see it in the Jersey breed. They're well known for being more at risk of it. I think now, I believe reading something on it, it's really down to, I suppose, the density of bone relative to the size of the animal. Like, if you look at what is the animal actually, they're relying on mobilizing their own calcium stores, Stuart, right?
Yeah.
So it's just an issue in terms of the Jersey has a difference in its capacity or its reserves, how it mobilizes its reserves naturally. Okay, so you're relying on the bone calcium reserves you're relying on the cow to mobilize her own reserve, in order to get over the milk fever issue. The Jersey doesn't have the reserve or doesn't have the efficiency of mobilization maybe that the black and white might have. So it's just an innate thing in the breed. It's not to say that, that it can be controlled by making sure that all the things we've talked about are done right. But it does require a little bit more attention. And maybe one other thing that some people are saying is with some of our lads will be saying with crossbreds, they do tend to be easier to put weight on as dry cows. They do tend, you can often see crossbred cow, because they're smaller cow maybe, and their intake per kilo of live weight is high, but their overall requirement is relatively low because they're smaller. They tend to they can get over conditioned a bit easier. So just watch that as well, that you don't overdo your crossbred cows. That combined with the difference in how they mobilize calcium can cause a bit of an issue that you just have to watch out for, I think.
Okay, and just two final questions then. The calcium boluses, do you think they're effective for the at-risk cow? And what about feeding rock salt before calving? Is that okay?
I think certainly the calcium boluses are, when we looked at that first chart that we saw there, Stuart, there's a drop in calcium, right, for sure. The calcium bolus, good quality calcium bolus, will offer a very absorbable type of calcium right on the point of calving when the cow needs it to get over that hump, right? For higher risk cows, following the instructions of how you do it in terms of doing it on the point of calving, I certainly think the calcium boluses are a good job. They are effective. I would certainly say they're a good job to get over that. The other question was the rock salt. Look, I suppose with rock salt, we didn't get into decab there, and about the difference in anions and cations and all that. I suppose with rock salt, it's not, while it's a source of minerals, it's not the mineral that's going to make the difference for milk fever. We want magnesium, really, is what we're talking about. I would be probably saying with rock salt, not for the couple of weeks pre-calving, and maybe if you want to feed it post-calving when cows are onto a higher concentrate, possibly a benefit. But I think for the couple of weeks pre-calving, in order to keep the mineral balance right, it's probably reducing the amount of salt and reducing the amount of sodium is probably what I'd be doing rather than increasing it.
Yeah. So very good. So I suppose to summarize it, I suppose people, like, it's going to vary from year to year within farms, because obviously silage may vary in its K content and so forth. So people, if you get a milk fever very early on, it might, or one or two very early on, it might be important to react to that quickly before it becomes a significant problem. Yeah. And there are simple enough ways, I suppose, your mag chloride and your mag oxide, as you pointed out. So your mag oxide being your CalMag. There are solutions that probably kick in after about 3 to 4 days of using Joe in many cases in response to problems. And the boluses, I suppose, again, like I often talk about trying to do things on your own terms. I mean, for the sake of the price of the bolus, to handle the cow in a scenario where you're kind of in control of it, so she's maybe just calved or on the point of calving, and you put the bolus onto her, rather than coming up to check cows, maybe to find a cow down as a result of having milk fever kicked in or something, is a much better way. And look, there's a cost associated with it, but I think you can see there from that rather complex diagram that you had earlier on, Joe, the impact that calcium has on so many levels for cows. So trying to cover off those angles, I think it actually, you'd invest a little bit of money, but you'd save an awful lot of money potentially in the long term, or gain a lot of money as a result of it. So I think the key thing is probably to have a conversation with your vet in relation to it as well. I think there's possibly more and more people kind of looking at dealing with those higher parity cows and taking them as automatically high risk potentially, and giving them the likes of the boluses or giving them the extra mag to try to get them over the edge. And I suppose just be aware of it. It's a big problem, and it creates an awful lot of other problems. So like ketosis, downer cows, metritis obviously, and retained cleanings are all issues that you want to be trying to avoid, especially in any kind of a calving system, but especially in compact calving systems where you've just cows, a wall of cows coming at you. You don't want those problems. So I suppose just to have the conversation, I suppose, with your own vet or with your own advisor to cover off those angles, I suppose, in advance of the main bulk of cows starting to calve. So look, we'll have to wrap it up. As I said, we have to move on to the next group for 11 o'clock. So thanks a million, Joe. Hopefully everybody got benefit from that, and the best of luck with the calving season, and we'll be back again next week. So we'll talk to you then.
That's all for this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar series. And don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with our usual Dairy Edge interview on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and thanks for listening.